Every single human civilization that has ever existed believed in something invisible. Every single one. Tribes in the Amazon that never spoke to the outside world. Ancient peoples of Australia isolated for 50,000 years. Civilizations in Africa, Asia, Europe, the Americas, all of them. Separated by oceans, separated by thousands of years, completely different languages, foods, climates, and every single one independently arrived at the exact same conclusion. There are forces in this world you cannot see, and those forces are watching you. That is not a coincidence. That is not something humans were taught. That is something the human brain produces on its own, the same way it produces language, the same way it produces music. And the question nobody asks is why. The answer is stranger than any religion ever invented. And it starts not with a god, but with your own brain. Your brain is paranoid. Not in a bad way, in a survival way. It is wired to assume that everything around you has intentions, that things want something, that nothing just happens by accident. You hear a sound at night. Your brain doesn't say maybe it's the wind. Your brain says something is out there, something that wants something. And it does this automatically, before you can think, before you can reason. The reaction comes first, because for hundreds of thousands of years, the cost of being wrong in one direction was nothing. You run from the wind, you waste 10 seconds. Life goes on, but the cost of being wrong in the other direction was death. You assume it's the wind, it's a leopard. You're gone. So your brain evolved to see intention everywhere. In storms, in drought, in disease, in everything that happened with no visible cause. Something is doing this, something wants this, and if something wants this, then maybe something can be reasoned with, maybe something can be stopped. That is where it starts. Not with wisdom, not with philosophy, with fear and a brain that refuse to accept that bad things just happen. Now imagine you're living 100,000 years ago. Someone in your group gets sick, fever, can't stand up. You watch them lie there and you have no explanation, no germ theory, no biology, nothing. Just a person who was fine yesterday and is dying today. Your brain does what it always does. It looks for the agent. Something caused this. And then 3 days later, the person who had an argument with a sick person last week gets sick too. Your brain connects those dots instantly. That person did something wrong. Something invisible is punishing them. You don't decide to think this. Your brain generates this conclusion automatically. And once it does, everything changes. Because now there are rules. Invisible rules enforced by invisible forces. And if there are rules, there are ways to follow them. Ways to stay safe. Ways to survive. That is religion. Not a book, not a building, not a ceremony. Just a brain generating rules for a world that otherwise makes no sense. And here is the part that changes everything. In 1994 in southeastern Turkey, archaeologists dug up something that broke every assumption experts had about where religion came from. Göbekli Tepe, massive stone pillars, 6 meters tall, 20 tons each, carved with animals and symbols and human figures with a precision that takes years to master. Built 11,600 years ago, before farming, before pottery, before permanent settlements. Before any of the things we associate with organized human society. Hunter-gatherers built this. People with no metal tools, no writing, no cities. They built one of the most sophisticated structures in human history. And they didn't build it to live in, they built it to worship in. The archaeologist who spent his life excavating this site said something that the entire field is still arguing about. Religion didn't come after civilization. Civilization came after religion. People didn't settle down and then build temples. They built temples and then settled down around them. The gods didn't come last. The gods came first. Everything else was built in their shadow. The first gods were nothing like the gods you know. No faces, no names, no stories, no commandments, just forces. The thing behind the lightning, the thing that decides whether the hunt succeeds, the thing that chooses who gets sick and who doesn't. Shapeless, nameless, everywhere, and completely indifferent unless you did something to get their attention. Which meant you needed rituals, not because rituals worked in any physical sense, but because rituals gave you the feeling of control in a world where you had none. You can't stop the storm. But you can do the thing that the last person did before the storm stopped. You can repeat the gesture, say the words, leave the offering, and if the storm stops, you have proof. If it doesn't, you didn't do it right. The ritual is never wrong. Only the person performing it can be wrong. That logic is airtight. That logic survived 100,000 years. That logic is still alive today in ways most people don't even notice in themselves. And here is what nobody talks about. It worked. Not because the forces were real, because the belief was real. A group of people who share the same invisible rules behave differently than a group that doesn't. They trust each other more. They cooperate better. They're harder to break apart when things get bad. They're more willing to sacrifice for each other because they believe something is watching and keeping score. A group of 30 people who believe they'll be punished for betraying each other is a completely different thing from 30 people with no shared belief at all. The gods didn't just explain the world, the gods held people together. And the groups that stayed together survived, and the groups that survived had children. And those children grew up inside the same belief. And they passed it to their children. And 100,000 years later, those children are still here. Still building, still worshipping, still performing rituals whose original meaning was lost thousands of years ago, but whose function never changed. We solved lightning. We solved fever. We solved almost everything the first gods were invented to explain. And yet religion is still here, in every culture on Earth, in billions of lives. Because it was never really about lightning. It was about the terror of a world that gives you no guarantees. The need to believe that things happen for reasons. That someone somewhere knows you exist. That the universe is not just a cold machine running without anyone at the controls. That need didn't disappear when science arrived. It just got quieter. It found new shapes, new words, new rituals with new names. Because the brain that invented the first god 100,000 years ago is the exact same brain you are using right now. Same circuits, same fears. Same desperate need to find intention in a world that mostly just happens. And somewhere underneath everything you think you know and everything you think you believe, there is a very old part of your mind that is still doing exactly what it was built to do. Still listening, still watching, still waiting for something invisible to answer back,